The axe bit deep, sending splinters flying in the dying light. Donald Braddock paused, his breath fogging in the cold Colorado air. Winter was coming. He could smell it in the wind. His gaze settled on a tall pine, one with a strange bulge in its trunk, like a giant knot pushing out from under the bark. He'd never seen a tree grow like that, not in all his years. "Might as well take that one," he muttered, his voice a rough growl from disuse. The thud of the axe was a familiar rhythm against the mountain's silence. When the tree finally crashed to the ground, the sound was like distant thunder. He started splitting the trunk for kindling. That's when his axe struck something hard. Sparks flew, lighting up the dusk. It wasn't wood, it was metal. Donald frowned, running a calloused hand over the gash in the log. What in tarnation? He worked carefully now, using the axe to pry and peel the wood away from whatever was buried in the heart of the pine. The trunk split, and revealed an iron box, dark with rust, wedged deep inside as if the tree had grown around it, swallowing a secret hole. His hands trembled as he worked it free. It was heavy, about the size of a Bible. The lock had long since rusted away. Night was falling fast. He carried the wood and the mysterious box back to the one-room shelter he'd built with his own hands 15 years ago, back when Sarah was still alive. He pushed the thought away. He always did. A single lamp cast a warm glow on the rough wooden table. The box sat before him, a silent challenge. Part of him wanted to toss it in the fire. Some mysteries were better left alone. He'd learned that the hard way. But he couldn't. With careful fingers, he worked the rusted lid open. Inside, protected from the years, lay a bundle of papers, letters, and something else, wrapped in faded cloth. The paper was stained, but the writing was clear. He moved closer to the lamp, his old eyes squinting. "My dearest friend, if you are reading this, then I am gone, and my Mariah needs help. She is 14 now. Part Apache, part mine. I pray someone kind will find these letters and see that justice is done." Donald's throat went tight. He didn't want this. He didn't want to care about some stranger's troubles. He'd had enough grief to last 10 lifetimes. But he kept reading. He unwrapped the cloth bundle. A silver cross on a delicate chain tumbled into his palm. It caught the firelight, sending soft gleams dancing across the cabin walls. And there was something else. A folded document. A deed. A deed to the rich land down by the river. Land any rancher in the valley would kill to own. The letters told the rest of the story. A dying mother's desperate words. Warnings about men who would steal what was rightfully her daughter's. Prayers for protection. Love, poured out in ink and paper, sealed away in iron and wood. He put everything back, but left the cross on the table. It seemed to glow in the firelight. Sleep wouldn't come. He lay in his narrow bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the wind. The cross gleamed, reminding him of another cross, the one Sarah had worn, the one he'd buried with her and their little Ruth when the fever took them. He tried to shut out the memories, but they came anyway. Sarah's voice reading from her Bible, Ruth's laughter, the terrible, crushing silence after they were gone. And now this. Another story of loss, growing inside a tree. A girl named Mariah, with Apache blood and a mother's prayers. A girl who needed help. "I don't want any part of this," Donald whispered to the darkness. But he was lying. 15 years of solitude had built walls around his heart, but they weren't as solid as he thought. That iron box had already started a thaw in a frozen stream. He got up and added wood to the fire. The cross on the table caught the new flames, winking at him like a star. Like it or not, he was part of the story now. He picked up the first letter again. The mother wrote of her worry. Worry for a daughter with mixed blood in a world that wasn't kind. The deed was valuable. Prime grazing land, good water, the kind of land that got a man rich or got him killed. How did the box get in the tree? Someone must have hidden it, planning to come back. They never did. The tree grew around it, holding it secret until his axe set it free. As the first gray light of dawn touched the window, Donald set the letters aside. He'd come to these mountains to escape the world. Now, the world had found him. He picked up the silver cross. He could sell it, buy supplies for the winter. But he knew he wouldn't. It belonged to the girl, Mariah. The question was, what was he going to do about it? He stood at his window watching the sun rise, knowing his life of solitude was over. He just didn't know how much. Morning light streamed through the cabin. Donald saddled his old mule, Jenny. "Reckon we're heading to town, girl," he murmured. The trail down the mountain was treacherous. He passed the overgrown path to his old homestead, to the 2 graves he hadn't visited in 15 years. Not today. The memories were sharp enough already. The town had grown, more buildings, more dust, more noise. He tied Jenny at the trough and headed for the simple white church at the end of the street. He found Reverend Harlan in his study. "Well, if it isn't the mountain man himself," the preacher said, surprised. Donald didn't waste time. He pulled out the cross and the deed, laying them on the desk. "Found these, in a tree." Reverend Harlan picked up the cross. Recognition flickered in his eyes. "Lord have mercy," he breathed. "I know this cross." Donald's head snapped up. "You do? Saw it about 6 months back?" The preacher's face darkened. "Hanging around the neck of a girl, half Apache child." A twist in Donald's gut. The girl was real. She was close. "Some local boys ran her off," Harlan continued, his voice grim. "Calling her names that would shame their mothers. Chased her away from the church door before I could help." Donald's hands clenched into fists. "Where did she go?" "There's been talk. Someone living rough down by the river, past Walker's old place." The preacher looked at him. "You thinking of looking for her?" "Might," Donald said. He spent the afternoon asking quiet questions. The store owner mentioned a thief stealing beans, the blacksmith's wife, missing clothes from her line. Walker, the farmer by the river, complained about snares in his rabbit hutches. "Dirty thief," the farmer spat. "If I catch 'em, they'll wish they'd never been born." The sun was sinking when Donald finally led Jenny down the path to the river. Somewhere ahead, a girl's voice rose in a song. The melody was lonely, but strong. He tied Jenny and moved through the brush. He saw a makeshift shelter of driftwood and willow branches. The singing stopped. "I know you're there," a young voice called out. "I ain't here to cause trouble," Donald said, keeping his voice gentle. A figure emerged. A thin girl, about 14, wearing a patched dress too big for her. Her black hair was tied back with a faded ribbon. In her hands, she gripped a rabbit snare like it was a weapon. "You're Mariah," Donald said. It wasn't a question. Her eyes widened, then narrowed with suspicion. "How do you know my name?" Slowly, Donald reached into his pocket. The silver cross caught the last rays of the setting sun as he held it out. "I believe this belongs to you." Mariah stared. Her tough composure cracked. For a second he saw the grieving daughter underneath. "Where did you get that?" she whispered, her voice trembling. "Found it, in a box, inside a tree up on my mountain." He kept his hand steady. "There were letters, too, from your mother." A small sound escaped her, half gasp, half sob. The rabbit snare dropped from her hands. She moved closer, drawn by the sight of her mother's cross. When she reached for it, her own small hands were calloused and scratched, the hands of a survivor. "It's really mine," she whispered, touching the silver. "I thought I'd lost it forever." The river turned to gold and crimson in the sunset. but neither of them noticed. Their world had narrowed to a silver cross, passing from one scarred hand to another, a piece of a past she thought was gone forever. But it wasn't. It was just the beginning. Donald held the cross steady. "Your mother left this for you," he said softly. With trembling hands, Mariah took it, clutching it to her chest as tears finally came. "Mama's cross," she whispered. Donald pulled out one of the letters. "Would you like to hear what she wrote?" She nodded, her eyes never leaving the cross. "To whoever finds this," Donald read, his rough voice gentling, "I entrust my greatest treasure, my daughter Mariah. The land deed enclosed is her rightful inheritance. I beg you, protect her. Let her know she was loved beyond measure." He lowered the letter. She stood perfectly still. "Why?" she finally asked. "Why would you help me? Nobody else has." "Truth is, I don't rightly know," he admitted. "But your mother's words, they felt like a command I couldn't ignore." He gestured toward the highlands. "I've got a cabin up there. It's warm and dry, safer than here." Her eyes, far older than her years, searched his face. "How do I know I can trust you?" "You don't," Donald said simply. "But winter's coming. The offer's there." She glanced at her makeshift camp, then back at him. Finally, she gave a small nod. "I'll come. For now." They rode up the mountain on his mule, Jenny, as darkness fell. Mariah sat behind him, holding on, but keeping her distance. They stopped to rest at a stream. She slipped off the saddle and pulled a small pouch from her bundle. "Dried service berries," she offered. "I gathered them last week." The simple act of her sharing the little she had touched him. "My uncle taught me which ones were good to eat," she said suddenly. "Before the soldiers came." The rest of the way up, she seemed to sit a little easier. Finally, they crested a ridge. The lamplight from his cabin window was a welcome gleam in the dark. Inside, the single room was spare but tidy. Donald built up the fire. "You can have the bed," he said. "I'll make a pallet here by the fire." She stood in the doorway, her eyes taking in every detail, every shadow. The wariness of a hunted animal. He set 2 plates on the table, 2 cups, a loaf of bread, and some dried venison. Setting 2 places instead of 1 made his hands tremble. "Ain't much," he said gruffly, "but you're welcome to it." She finally stepped inside, closing the door. She sat at the table, her mother's cross held tight in one hand. Before eating, she bowed her head, her lips moving in silent prayer. The gesture was so familiar, it made his chest ache. How many times had he watched Sarah do the same? Without meaning to, he bowed his own head. He hadn't prayed in 15 years. When she looked up, her dark eyes met his. Not with trust, not yet, but with the beginning of understanding. They ate in silence as the fire crackled, 2 lost souls who had found shelter on the mountain. But as he watched her carefully wrap the leftover bread in her napkin, a habit born of hunger, he saw a flicker of hope. The silver cross gleamed in the firelight, a testament to a promise he hadn't realized he'd made. He was her protector now, and that meant the world was about to come crashing down on them. Dawn revealed a thin blanket of snow. Mariah woke first, silently sweeping the floor. "Mama always said a clean home makes for a clear mind," she said when she saw him watching. Outside, he showed her how to split kindling. She learned fast. "Had to be," she replied simply. "Can't afford to waste time learning slow." She seasoned a rabbit she'd caught with wild sage and cooked it over the fire. It had been a long time since anyone but him had cooked in this cabin. "Tell me about your mother," he said gently. "She knew she was dying," Mariah said, her hand straying to the cross. "She told me about the deed, how she'd hidden it. Said someday a good man would find it, someone who'd help make things right." "I ain't sure I qualify as that good man," Donald said. Maybe that's why you do, she replied, her dark eyes meeting his. The words hit him hard. He pushed back from the table. We should ride into town, he said gruffly. Show Reverend Harlan the deed. Make it legal. Will they treat me like before? She asked, her voice small. Not while you're with me, he said, surprising himself with the steel in his voice. In town, Reverend Harlan examined the papers. Everything appears in order, he said, smiling at Mariah. Your mother was a wise woman. But their peace was shattered by sharp footsteps. Samuel Lyle, the town banker, appeared in the doorway, his eyes fixed on the documents. Something that needs the bank's attention, perhaps? Private business, Donald said shortly. The banker's smile was thin as a razor. As the primary holder of property notes in this region, I have a responsibility to verify all land claims, particularly when they involve, unusual circumstances. His gaze slid over Mariah like she was dirt. The deed is legitimate, Reverend Harlan said firmly. Even so, Lyle purred. These matters require proper scrutiny. Courts may need to be involved. These things take time. The threat was clear as glass. Meaning you aim to make trouble, Donald said. Meaning I aim to ensure everything is legal, Lyle corrected smoothly. They left the church, but Donald could feel eyes on their backs. Word traveled fast. He saw people gathering in doorways, whispering. The discovery of the deed had stirred up something ugly, like poking a stick in a snake's nest. On the ride back up the mountain, Mariah's arms tightened around his waist. They'll try to take it, won't they? She asked quietly. He thought of Lyle's cold eyes, the whispers in the street. They might try, he admitted, but we'll be ready. He had wanted no part of other people's troubles, but looking at the determined set of Mariah's jaw, he knew he couldn't walk away. Sometimes a man's conscience gives him no choice. He just didn't realize how high the price of that choice would be. The sound of hoofbeats shattered the morning quiet. 3 riders. The man in front was Clay Maddox, the biggest rancher in the valley. His men looked hard, their hands resting on their guns. Get inside, Donald said to Mariah. Maddox didn't bother to dismount. Braydock, heard you're claiming some Riverside property. Not claiming, Donald said, stepping onto the porch. Got a legal deed. Maddox smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Now that's where we have a problem. That land's been promised to my operation. Paper I've got says different. Let's be reasonable, Maddox said, his voice smooth as ice. Whatever that half-breed girl told you. Watch your mouth, Donald cut in, his voice hard as iron. Maddox's eyes narrowed. That land's worth good money. I'm prepared to be generous if you hand over that deed now. Not for sale, Donald said, lifting his rifle slightly. And it ain't mine to sell. Belongs to the girl. The girl? Maddox spat. Ain't no court gonna uphold her claim, and you know it. The sheriff will be up here next, and he knows which side his bread is buttered on. He wheeled his horse, calling back. Think on it, Braddock. Things can get mighty uncomfortable for a man up here alone. Donald watched them disappear. The cabin door creaked open. Can you really protect me from men like that? Mariah whispered. He looked at the fear and trust in her eyes. Won't let them harm you, he said gruffly. They didn't have to wait long. Just past noon, a single rider approached, Sheriff Abel Crane. Stay inside, Donald told Mariah. Donald, the sheriff nodded, his expression troubled. I'm here in my official capacity. Need to examine that deed. Reverend Harlan already verified it. With all due respect, he ain't a legal authority. I'll need to take that deed back to town. For review. Donald's voice went cold. You mean so Maddox's lawyers can lose it? The sheriff's face reddened. Just doing my job, Donald. Hand over the deed. Nice and peaceful. No. Donald's voice was quiet but firm. You want it? You'll have to take it. The tension was a physical thing between them. The sheriff's hand twitched, but he didn't draw. Finally, he backed down. "You're making a mistake, Donald," Crane called as he rode away. "This ain't over." Donald went back inside. "What happens now?" Mariah asked, her face pale. "We wait," Donald said, "and we pray." He didn't see the figure watching from the tree line. The man stood motionless in the gathering dark, then melted back into the forest. They were isolated. The law was against them, and they were being watched. The game had changed. This wasn't about a piece of paper anymore. It was about survival. Reverend Harlan rode up a few days later. "There's trouble brewing," he said, his face grave. "Maddox has been in the saloon, buying drinks and spreading poison, calling Mariah a squatter, saying you're using her to steal water rights." The banker, Lyle, had posted a notice questioning the deed's validity. "But there's hope," the preacher said. "The circuit preacher, Reverend Matthews, is due in 2 weeks. He knows territorial law. He can verify the deed, give it his official seal. That will make it much harder for Maddox to challenge." 2 weeks. It felt like a lifetime. "Hold fast," the preacher urged. "Keep the deed safe." That night, Donald pried up a loose floorboard beneath his bed and hid the iron box. The next morning, Mariah insisted on going to town with him. "I won't hide like I'm ashamed," she said, her chin high. "My mother never did." The town was a gauntlet of hostile stares. In the general store, 3 of Maddox's ranch hands swaggered in. "Since when we letting squatters shop with decent folk?" one of them drawled, deliberately bumping into Mariah. Donald's hand dropped to his gun. "The truth," he said quietly, "is you're fixing to lose some teeth if you touch her again." Before a fight could break out, the church bells began to ring. At the Sunday service, the church was packed. Reverend Harlan asked Mariah if she would sing. She walked to the front and her voice rose, clear and sweet, filling the small church with amazing grace. Donald saw women dabbing their eyes. He saw men who had scowled at them soften. But in the back pew, Clay Maddox and his men sat like thunderclouds, their faces hard with hate. Not all hearts could be moved by a child's song. A heavy snowstorm trapped them in the cabin for 3 days. The world outside was a swirling whiteness. Inside, they talked. He told her about Sarah and William. She taught him Apache words. "Shih," she said, touching his arm. "It means my father." Then she taught him another. "Nazgai." It means protector. When the storm broke, Donald went out to chop wood and saw the tracks, hoof prints, circling the entire cabin, coming close to each window. Someone had been watching them during the storm, using the blizzard for cover. That evening, an old trapper friend knocked on the door. "Came to warn you," he said. "Maddox has been busy. He got the sheriff to issue a warrant, claiming the girl's a thief." "That's a lie!" Mariah cried. "Mrs. Taylor gave me those things." "Truth ain't what matters to Maddox," the trapper said sadly. "He's done waiting on courts and preachers. He means to break you, Braddock, and soon." The hoof prints, the false warrant. These weren't warnings anymore. They were the opening moves in a war. And the first battle was coming much sooner than they thought. Dawn broke. Donald stepped onto the porch. A flicker of orange caught his eye. Smoke. Thick, dark smoke, curling from the barn's roof. "Mariah! The barn's on fire!" They raced across the muddy yard. Flames were already consuming the dry timber. Inside, his mule kicked in panic. He wrestled the door open, the heat scorching his face, and led the terrified animal out. They fought the fire frantically, but it was no use. The barn groaned and collapsed in a shower of sparks. Through the smoke, he heard hoofbeats. Clay Maddox rode into view, a mask of false concern on his face. My, he drawled. "Terrible accident. Makes a man wonder if this place is really safe for a child." "This was no accident, Maddox," Donald growled. "Your men set this fire." "Serious accusation," Maddox sneered. "Got any proof?" "You set foot on my land again," Donald said, his voice shaking with rage. You'll leave feet first." Maddox just laughed as he rode away. They spent the afternoon salvaging what they could. By late afternoon, Mariah went to gather firewood by the river. Donald heard the rhythmic sound of her splitting branches. Then, silence. His head snapped up. "Mariah!" No answer. He ran toward the river. Her basket lay overturned. In the mud were fresh hoof prints, multiple horses, leading toward town. "No," he breathed. "No." He burst through the door of the sheriff's office. Crane looked up, unsurprised. "Where is she?" Donald demanded. The sheriff jerked a thumb toward the cells. Mariah sat on a narrow cot, her shawl torn, clutching her mother's cross. "Had to lock her up," Crane said, not meeting his eyes. "Formal complaint of theft." "Those were gifts." "Law is the law," Crane said. "Hearings next week. Unless someone wants to post bail, $100 ought to do it." $100. He might as well have said $1 million. The fire had taken everything. Maddox had laid his trap perfectly. The fire was a diversion. The warrant, the bail, it was a checkmate. "I'll get you out of here, Mariah," he swore, his forehead pressed against the cold bars. "I swear it." "I know," she whispered, managing a brave smile. "Just don't do anything foolish." He rode back to his smoldering land, the cabin feeling achingly empty. Maddox thought he'd won. He was counting on Donald reacting with violence, proving himself an unfit guardian. And that's when the truth hit him like a physical blow. He couldn't fight this with bullets. He had to fight it with something stronger. Tomorrow, he would begin a different kind of war, one that even Maddox wouldn't see coming. Donald rode high into the mountains, following directions Mariah had written for him on a scrap of paper. He was going to find her uncle, Neshoba. The air grew thin. The trail grew faint. He was a stranger in this territory. As twilight fell, he saw smoke, a circle of hide lodges, an Apache camp. He dismounted, leaving his rifle on his mule. A sign of trust. An older man emerged. Scars marked his face, but his eyes held a quiet dignity. It was Neshoba. "You come far," Neshoba said in careful English. "Why?" "I'm Donald Braddock. I've been caring for your niece, Mariah." He swallowed the shame. "I failed her. Men who want her land, they took her. She's in the town jail." Donald told him everything, the box, the deed, Maddox's threats, the fire. "I wanted to fight," he finished, "but violence would only prove them right." Neshoba was silent for a long time. "You believe strength lives only in the gun?" he finally asked. "Truth has strength. Mercy has strength. The path of peace is harder than the path of war. It takes more courage." Donald stared into the fire. He thought of Mariah, praying in her cell. "The circuit preacher comes in 3 days," Donald said, "but Maddox won't wait." "Then we must show the town her strength. And yours," Neshoba said. "You fought for her with a gun ready. Now fight for her with open hands. Let them see the truth. I will ride with you." They rode down the mountain at dawn. As they rounded the last bend, Donald's heart stopped. Black smoke stained the blue sky. His cabin was a smoking ruin. Timbers collapsed into ash. Maddox had destroyed everything. Rage roared up inside him, hot as the flames. But Neshoba's quiet presence beside him was an anchor. "He burns your past," Neshoba said softly, "to keep you from building a future." Donald forced his fists to unclench. "Then he's failed, because I'm not finished building yet." They rode toward town, their faces grim. Maddox thought he had broken him, burned him out. He was wrong. He'd only forged him into something harder than steel. The real fight was about to begin. The sight of the mountain man and the Apache warrior riding side by side into town silenced the street. They went straight to the church. Donald laid out his plan to Reverend Harlan. "The whole town needs to hear these letters," he said. "Tomorrow is Sunday service." The preacher nodded. "Everyone will be here. We will let the truth speak for itself." The churchwomen, already furious over Mariah's arrest, spread the word. Something important was happening. Sunday morning, the church was packed. Farmers, shopkeepers, their wives. Clay Maddox swaggered in, flanked by his men, guns on their hips, a deliberate show of force. Then the sheriff arrived, escorting Mariah. She was pale, but her head was high. The silver cross gleamed at her throat. The deputies sat her in the front pew, like a prisoner on display. Reverend Harlan stepped to the pulpit. "Brothers and sisters," he began, "we gather today to hear a truth that has been too long buried." He gestured to Donald. Donald's legs felt like wood as he walked to the pulpit. He set down the iron box, the letters, the deed. The entire church held its breath. "Many of you know part of this story," he said, his voice rough, "about a deed, about water rights. But that ain't the real story. The real story is about a mother's love, about promises, about a young girl's rightful inheritance." He looked out at the faces. He saw Mariah, her eyes shining with tears. He picked up the first letter, and in the weighted silence, he began to read. "My dearest daughter Mariah," Donald read, his voice gaining strength. "If you are hearing these words, then God has called me home. You are not half of anything, my precious girl. You are whole and complete, carrying the best of both your father's people and mine. The silver cross you wear belonged to my grandmother. It represents our faith and our family's right to this land." Several women were openly weeping now. "The deed I leave you is legal and true," Donald continued. "The river water rights belong to you, Mariah, by law and by blood." "That's a clever forgery." Maddox's voice cracked like a whip. He stood up, his face flushed. "You expect us to believe some half-breed girl has rights to the best water in the valley?" Mrs. Peterson, the storekeeper's wife, stood. "I remember that child and her mother," she said clearly. "That same silver cross hung around her mother's neck then, just as it does on Mariah now." One by one, other church women stood. They remembered the mother, her kindness, her dignity. Reverend Harlan then held up the cross. "This cross bears an inscription," he said, "a date, 1842, and a family name matching the deed." He turned to the sheriff. "Sheriff Crane, you've held an innocent girl in jail. On what evidence?" All eyes turned to the lawman. He stood slowly, twisting his hat in his hands. There wasn't any evidence," he admitted, his voice barely a whisper. A low rumble of anger swept through the church. "The theft charges were false," the sheriff confessed, his shoulders slumping. "I knew it wasn't right, but I was afraid." Maddox looked around wildly. His support was crumbling. His hired men were already backing toward the door. "We expect justice, Clay Maddox." Reverend Harlan's voice rang with authority. "The same justice God commands us to uphold for the orphan and the widow." Maddox was trapped, defeated not by bullets, but by the truth in a mother's letters. "This ain't over," he growled, but the threat was hollow. He stalked out of the church, his men slinking after him. In the sudden quiet, Donald read the last words. "Keep faith, little one. Hold fast to truth. Love will find its way home." The sheriff walked to the front, his face full of shame. "Miss Mariah," he said, "you're free to go. I am sorry." As Mariah rose, sunlight streamed through the windows, surrounding her in a gentle glow. Truth had found its voice, and it had set her free. Sheriff Crane's keys jangled. The heavy cell door swung open. Mariah rushed forward. "Father!" The word burst from her as she threw herself into Donald's arms. He held her close, his own eyes burning. The simple word filled a space in his heart he thought would be hollow forever. "I'm here, little one," he choked out. "I'm here." Neshoba stepped forward. "The Apache people remember our promises," he said, his voice carrying through the hushed jailhouse. "We remember those who deal falsely, and those who deal true. My niece has our protection. Think carefully before you move against her again." Donald kept one arm around Mariah. "She'll be raised with respect for both heritages," he said to Neshoba. "I give you my word." Neshoba nodded. "You have proven yourself a true father to her." The next days, the sound of hammers filled the mountain air. The townsfolk, ashamed, had come to help rebuild. Men hauled timbers while the churchwomen brought food and blankets. Neshoba's young men worked alongside them, raising the walls of a new cabin, a new community. Sheriff Crane rode up one afternoon, hat in hand. "I failed in my duty," he said to Donald. "I let Maddox pressure me." "A man can learn from his mistakes," Donald replied quietly. When the cabin was finished, Donald hung the silver cross above the new hearth. As the sun set, Mariah slipped her hand into his. They were a family, forged in fire. Spring came. Neshoba brought seeds passed down through generations. "Corn, beans, and squash," he explained to Mariah as they knelt in the new garden. "Like family, they help each other grow strong." In town, wary nods turned to friendly greetings. The children now invited Mariah to their games. The change was slow, but it was real. The circuit preacher finally arrived and put his official seal on the deed. The land was legally hers, forever. That evening, Donald and Mariah sat on their new porch, watching the river rush past their land, glowing gold in the sunset. "I thought God had forgotten me," Donald said, his voice thick with emotion. "But his mercy was waiting all along, hidden in that tree." Mariah leaned against his shoulder. "Mother always said her prayers would be answered," she whispered. "She said God would send someone to be my father." The river flowed on, strong and free. Thank you for listening. Stories connect us in the most unexpected ways. If you felt that spark today, make sure you're subscribed. I share a new one daily, and the next might change your day.